This video is brought to you by these YouTube members. Thank you guys so much for your generous support. Hello everyone and welcome to the top 10 power autoers on Bleach Brave Souls. Now obviously when you build them correctly, almost any character can be used for autoing, but the following are the best of the power characters. Now this list is solely based on autoing, and it's ranked based on their reliability and speed. Just because the character is ahead of another character on this list does not mean they're better overall. Again, this is just for autoing. With that said, let's begin.
2対1で卑怯かもしれねえけど頼むぞ井上。
Starting off the list, we have the 1000-year Blood War version of Orihime, who has a really high SP, Berserker at 20%, and Frenzy. This means that her strong attacks are going to deal a lot of damage. They all have fairly average range for strong attacks, with her strong attack 3 being a full screen. But what really sets her apart and the reason she's on this list is her strong attack 2. It's not only a heal move, but it's also a barrier move, and it helps increase her survivability. Because this heal move is also a barrier move, she will have to wait a little longer to get it back than most heal moves, though her strong attack recharge link does help with that. Plus she's got the ability Healer, which can increase the amount of health she gets back when healing. Now this Orihime is ranged, so she'll be able to deal damage with her normal attack from a distance. It's not that much since she doesn't have the highest attack and she only has a plus 20 bruiser, but build her correctly and she'll be an extremely durable character, who will eventually get the job done, albeit slower than the rest of the characters on this list.
仰せのままにいかがでしょう
Now over the last few years, there have been two characters that just keep popping up in my top 10 list. The first is the 1000-year Blood War version of Retsu, and the second is this swimsuit version of Nemu. Now admittingly she did go missing for a while, but she became relevant again when she got a resurrection, which not only gave her an increase in stats, but also frenzy and a strong attack damage link, making her strong attacks hit a lot harder than before. In addition to that, this Nemu also has a decent attack and a plus 30 bruiser, so her normal attacks are actually decent. Now while there are other characters that didn't make it on this list with much higher stats and better multipliers, this Nemu is a fairly decent hybrid character. Plus, if you build her correctly, she is extremely difficult to kill. This is because she has two ways to heal herself. The first is her strong attack 2, which is your standard heal move. It comes back after 30 seconds and does a decent amount of damage thanks to her frenzy. The second is her stamina recovery link that heals Nemu for 20% of her total health anytime she enters a new area. The combination of these abilities and her attacks make her a fairly reliable character to auto with, since she can deal a decent amount of damage from both her normal attacks and her strong attacks. It's not a crazy amount like the rest of the characters on this list, but it's enough to clear an event in a respectable amount of time, and it's what helps land her at the number 9 spot on this list.
戦いに戻りましょう敗北は許されません
Next up, we have the past version of Red Subuna Hana. Though who can really tell? Unless it's the 1000-year Blood War version, she looks exactly the same. Anyway, it's the power one. She's got a really high attack as well as a plus 80 bruiser and a plus 20 nadlink. This means that on her own, she increases her normal attack damage by 100%. Now this isn't the equivalent of Flurry, since having Flurry would be better. Still, it means that her normal attack is going to do a lot of damage, and since she's ranged, she's going to be able to deal damage from a distance. Now this does make her a slower character to auto with, but it makes her more reliable. And although her SP may not be high, her strong attacks are useful. Her strong attack 1 is a pushback move that really helps when autoing when enemies get too close. Her strong attack 3 is a full screen move that can inflict debilitating laceration, and her strong attack 2 is a barrier move, which really helps when autoing because, well, barriers. Now these attacks will still deal a decent amount of damage if you decide not to chappy her, since she's got a plus 40 berserker. Though honestly, if I were you, I would chappy her, since as I mentioned, she's on the slower side of this list. Still, she's extremely reliable, and the fact that she's completely immune to being burnt means that you don't have to worry about burn hazards on the floor that are present in a lot of inheritance zones and droplet zones, though you'll still have to be careful of poison.
ジリエル神の使いの前になすすべなどなし
Alright, look, I'm not even gonna hide it. I don't really know how to pronounce this guy's first name. Like, people in the comments have told me how, but I get conflicting responses, and I even went back to the Kidap Game Station where they premiered this character, and they don't even know? Which, I mean, I guess it's not their fault since they didn't create the character. Kubo did, and he hasn't replied to my emails, which is unfortunate because I think he might be my cousin. So anyway, we're just gonna call him Libaro. Nabarro here has a really high SP as well as Frenzy. He's also got Berserker at 40% and Bruiser at 40%, and he'll be taking advantage of both of these, since characters use their normal normal attacks often when autoing, and his are actually really impressive. Not only do they have great range, but thanks to Libaro's ability to hit hidden enemies and his guard break, they are always gonna hit, and they're always gonna deal a good amount of damage. And don't even get me started on his strong attacks. They all have ridiculous range thanks to Havoc at 20, and they deal an absurd amount of damage. The only time he really would be in trouble is if enemies are behind him and he doesn't have a strong attack to take care of them. At that point, he might get easily swarmed. Honestly, I would actually love to put him higher on the list, but when autoing, characters don't typically use their strong attacks when they're supposed to, and instead use it whenever. I mean, who among us hasn't seen a character use their strong attack 3 on the last remaining enemy before entering a new area, or when they use a strong attack 3 on the very edge of a swarm of enemies, only dealing damage to 1 or 2 of them. Still, his normal attack is impressive enough to put him this high up on the list, but if you're dealing with tankier enemies, he can find himself in a bit of a bind.
ヤシュそこにいろこれを待ってたぜこのゾクゾクする感覚をよ
Next up, we have the Belief version of Kenpachi, who has a really high attack as well as flurry and poise. Now this guy is extremely reliable. He's got a damage reduction soul trait of 16% and it can be stacked up to 76%, meaning he can take a hit. When enemies are attacking him, he's able to attack them thanks to his poise, so unless he gets frozen or paralyzed, he can constantly be dealing damage. Kenpachi can also inflict debilitating weakening on all of his attacks, which lets him deal even more damage and take less damage from enemies that are weakened. He's very likely to do so with his strong attack too because it's a vortex move that surrounds him. This attack also helps keep enemies from attacking him since they'll be staggered while it's active. In addition to that, his normal attack is also likely to inflict the weakening, since each attack hits twice. Now as I mentioned, he is extremely reliable, thanks to the damage reduction. Unfortunately, they did give him a Captain Killer. This doesn't mean you can't take him in areas where killers are multiplied, it just means that that won't activate for him, unless you're up against a captain at the end. You can still use him in the events, and he will likely still get the job done, but unless you really beef up his attack, he's gonna be a lot slower than most of the characters on this list. Still, he's a great character to auto with, and at this point, odds are you have this character, since he is very common.
ハロウィンナイトだ。私の音色に溺れるか。
Next up is the Halloween version of Hallibell, who, much like the rest of the Hallibells, cost me a ridiculous amount of orbs, only for me to end up getting her in an unrelated event sometime months in the future. But I digress. She's got a really high attack as well as a plus 50 bruiser. She also has a 16% damage reduction link that can be stacked up to 76%, meaning she can be quite difficult to kill. Hallibell also has poise, meaning that while enemies are attacking her, she can attack them. And thanks to her paralysis immunity, the only way to really stagger her is to freeze her. In addition to being completely immune to being paralyzed, she can also inflict debilitating paralysis on all of her attacks. This also includes her strong attacks, which can deal a decent amount of damage thanks to her plus 40 berserker. If you build her correctly, she can actually be one of the more reliable characters on this list, since she can take a hit, is immune to paralysis, and she can attack while others are attacking her.
己の力を過信しない心が必要なのだ。
Next up on the list we have Ginry Kuchiki, a character with a really high attack as well as flurry and poise. Ginry actually has a hollow killer, meaning he's able to take advantage of killer multiplications, and he's got a damage reduction soul trait of 20%. It can be stacked up to 80%. This is actually pretty great, since he's ranged, so not only is it difficult for enemies to get to him before getting killed, but even if they do, they won't stagger him, and any amount of damage they deal will be reduced by up to 80%. In fact, the only real way they're gonna manage to stop him is if they kill him or paralyze him, since he's completely immune to being frozen. Ginry can also inflict debilitating paralysis on his strong attack 3 and his normal attack, which remember now hits twice thanks to his flurry. And while his strong attack 1 isn't able to inflict paralysis, it is pretty useful for keeping enemies away, which is what you want for a ranged character. Honestly, he's just a really solid character, and I hope it's not the last time we see him represented in the game.
代々受け継ぐ伝統の舞じゃ。お主も夢の世界へ誘ってやろう。
Next up, we have the Desert Society version of Yoruichi, a character with a really high attack, a normal attack damage link of 20%, bruiser at 20%, flurry, and poise. So not only does she not stagger, but she deals a crazy amount of damage with a normal attack, which can actually get even higher thanks to her strong attack too. It's a boost move and it has Enhancer, so for 20 seconds after she uses it, her attack, defense, and focus will be increased by 33%, increasing her overall damage output, as well as increasing her resistance to enemy attacks. Yoruichi can also inflict debilitating paralysis on all of her her attacks except for her strong attack 2, and she's got a soul reaper killer, so she can take full advantage of killer multiplications. Now as far as reliability goes, I will say that some other characters on this list do have her beat. She doesn't have a damage reduction soul trait after all. Still, she is pretty reliable, and when it comes to speed, her ridiculously high damage output makes her one of the fastest characters to take when autoing.
大地の洞窟を聞きなさい。ランサデルソ・ガミューサ。
Now coming in at number 2 is the character that took the number 1 spot last time I made this list, the Beyond Resurrection Camp for Your Own World version of Noelle. Now this Noelle does have a really high attack. She's also got Bruiser at 80%. Now this does make her deal a lot of damage with her normal attack, but characters like Yoruichi and Ginry do have her beat, at least in terms of damage. The reason I put her above them though is thanks to her actual normal attack. Noelle has a very unique normal attack, where she lunges every time she attacks. This not only increases the range of her attack, but also makes her really difficult to hit. And because she has poise, enemies can't stagger her. So as long as she's attacking, they can't hit her. And even if they do, there's a chance that they're not going to deal that much damage. All of her attacks have a chance to inflict debilitating weakening, and her strong attack 2 is a vortex move that surrounds her, which not only helps weaken the enemies around her, but also makes them stagger, and unable to actually attack. And thanks to her strong attack recharge link, this attack comes back faster. You wouldn't actually expect a strong attack recharge link to be useful for a normal attacking character, but here we are. Noelle's also got a really useful strong attack 3. It's a hybrid vortex move that gathers enemies in one spot before hitting them one final time. It's very likely to inflict weakening, and it's very useful for a normal attacking character to get enemies in one spot. She may deal less damage than some of the other characters on this list, but it's still a really good amount of damage, and her abilities make her one of the more reliable and faster characters on this list.
俺にできるのは全ての力をこの斬撃に込めることだけだ。見届けるがいい。全てを無に返すこの力を。トルメンタでムルシエラコ。
オリ姫必殺ウォーターアタック。
見えるかよ。地獄が俺にすがりついてるぜ。よそ者の俺に手を貸してでもてめえを逃がしはしねえぞよ。私も本気で行きますか。切り裂き紅姫。
私に勝とうなんて100万年早いわ。全開で行くわよ。
And finally at number 1, we have the Machine Society version of Ryuruka. Now she actually takes the number 1 spot for a few reasons. One, she hits really hard. She's got a really high attack as well as a plus 20 bruiser, flurry, and poise. And if you made it this far, I trust I don't have to explain those abilities to you. In addition to that, she can also inflict debilitating weakening on all of her attacks, including her strong attack 2 that's a vortex move that surrounds her, similar to Noelle and Kenny before her. This lets her deal even more damage and take less damage if attacked by a weakened enemy. Her strong attack 3 is also one we've seen before. It's similar to Noelle's strong attack 3, and it's really useful for gathering enemies in one spot and inflicting weakening. Ryuruka's also got a damage reduction soul trait of 16%, and it can be stacked up to 76%, making her fairly reliable. Topping off the reliability is the fact that she's a human, and right now there's no events with enemies with human killers, so she's a pretty safe bet to take on anything that has hollow enemies, since she has a hollow killer. Finally, we have that last ability that lets you get an additional 5 tech link slot potions anytime you finish an inheritance zone. Normally I don't let this ability sway where they land on the list, since it doesn't actually contribute to how good the character is, but in this particular case, since it's autoing and a lot of us auto inheritance zone, this does carry some weight, and it's what helped land her at the number 1 spot on this list. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for some more top 10 lists.